Oh boy. Yeah, thanks everyone for attending. This is Functions as Forecasts, or using fast, embeddable, and standardized programming functions as scorable forecasts. My name is Ozzie Gooen. I'm running the Quantified Uncertainty Research Institute, where there are two of us now working full-time to figure out some cool future things in forecasting. We're funded a lot by some of the EA grant makers. Thank you very much to all those funders. You could reach us at this email address, and then one of the main things we're working on now is a Squiggle language, which is one way of exploring this basic topic. On a high level, I think functions as forecasts are like a really interesting thing, but one that has like a very big unexplored area associated with it. So this is we'll be going through a bunch of topics very quickly, I think. Feel free to raise your hand and ask questions, and the slides will be presented afterwards. So I'll try to give a quick rundown, but again, it's hard to like thoroughly go through the whole topic, especially because a lot of it is still being explored. So at a high level, there's a question for all the forecasters and everyone at this conference, which is like, where are we going as people in the forecasting industry? It would be fantastic for forecasting to become totally legal, or like for prediction markets too. But even after that, we'll still be stuck with the same forecasting methods that we have now. I know some people say, oh, we just need people to listen to us. Like we have all the answers on Manifold. We just need other people to like start listening to Manifold, and then the world would be run super well. I think it's not quite that simple for EAs trying to fund this space. They've realized that $1 million going into forecasting doesn't exactly change the world quite yet. It takes probably quite a bit of money per unit effort. And hopefully, with a lot of work, we could push to get that ratio changed. We want, like, in the future, hopefully it'll make sense for OpenPhil and other funders to spend billions of dollars funding people like you guys, right, forecasters to do awesome stuff, but the returns will be so worth it because we're using such great tooling that it winds up being a very obvious win. Something more like that. But of course, what to do with that, there are many, many steps, and I think that like functions as forecasts are one of the interesting things. So you may have, if you go on Manifold, this was one question over there that I found kind of humorous, where the question is like, the Apple Vision Pro, when will it be out? But of course, this one person has been rewriting this question for every country and for every month. This kind of shows some of the limitations that come with some of the existing forecasting systems. And this isn't unique just to this one thing. You see it all over. So in the stock market, people will ask, will the S&P 500 increase in September 2023? And like all these very specific dates, all these very specific points. Obviously in sports, there's one question, hopefully per activity, but there's a lot of possible activities. Even on the like Astral Star Codex questions, a lot of these questions are made to resolve at specific dates, but it would be very interesting to have a better idea of exactly when these items will happen, even before the end of 2023 or after 2023. So this kind of gives some indication of just like our systems right now. They're really cool, great job, Manifold, but we have a much longer way to go. What we have now, like, is definitely showing signs of possible improvement. Now, on the other hand, these are like the forecasting models and platforms. In a very different world, we have statistical modeling. That's typically like the old school, what academics and stuff would do in ivory towers, which has a very different set of strengths and weaknesses from forecasting platforms. So for example, if you go to Google, they'll give you all these results from the Frederick Purdy Center of International Futures, where they actually have timeline extrapolations of a whole bunch of different variables. Of course, they only show either the mean or the median, one line, but even so, it's like very nice structured data about a whole bunch of different things. In this case, you could filter it for a whole bunch of different countries. So that's like a really nice, elegant, structured solution, but it's for a very specific use case. You'll also see on Wall Street Zen, there are, of course, like predictions of where each company will go over time. And they don't do the best job at like showing exactly how correct their scores were in the past, but they have all this as like very structured data. And then separately, some of you may be familiar with micro-COVID, which was like a decently statistically driven calculator of how many like micro-COVIDs you'd get in different situations, where you'd enter information about the situation and get the answer. Separately, there are things like foodimpacts.org, which is a calculator where you enter parameters, and it gives you estimates for like how much suffering you're causing based on what animals you may be eating. So In these two types of paradigms, forecasting platforms are great because they're very general purpose. On Manifold, you could ask a question about almost anything. A lot of this comes because it's very highly standardized. Like, it's very specific exactly what questions you're allowed to ask and what the formats are. And we have data tracked in the same way of how accurate people are. But the disadvantage is that you get this cluster of very idiosyncratic questions, which could be quite a mess. Very much in part because every single question is just very narrow. It's one binary question, which is less than one bit of information typically that you get from that, or maybe a probability distribution, which is still very narrow. And these typically come from human judgment, so sometimes it'd be called judgmental forecasting. And that's different, of course, from statistical modeling, which would be statistical forecasting, which is great because it has high expressiveness. It's typically, within one area, it'll estimate many things in a very structured way. But it has the disadvantages that when this is done, it's typically done as a custom implementation with a custom UI for this one very specific use case. And that means that it's very hard for us to then score each one, because each one has to be scored on its own terms, typically using different scoring systems. It's very difficult for people to collaborate on them because there's no central setup. So on one hand, zooming out, we have expressiveness, how much is said. And then on the other hand, we have generality, how easy is it to say very many different things. And we have statistical models in this corner, and this corner we have judgmental forecasts. But obviously we want, there's some frontier. We want better things that over time will get more and more intense on this frontier, which is the why not both of these two options. But one way to do that is the obvious thing is we basically want more structured formats that'll allow us to express more things. Now, there are many different ways that we could do this. This is kind of one ladder of abstraction of how we could get increasingly more expressive, basically, with still a very common format. So on one hand, you have binary questions. On the other hand, there are cases of discrete choices, or where you may have a few different options. So it's one of those few, and you have to give probabilities. So Manifold has those now. Then you have probability distributions. And then on Metaculus, we're seeing a little bit of what you could call kind of advanced, or probability plus distributions plus, or advanced probability distributions. For example, they have a very simple time series estimate where you have to give 3 probability distributions representing 3 different points in time. But this is still a very limited setup. Later, you have discretized structured data, which would be more you could imagine a version of Manifold where they would say for every single country and every single product and every single time in the future, or every single month in the future, there's a separate question for that. But this is kind of a structured paradigm. So that's one way that it could work. Then we have arbitrary functions, which are when people submit custom functions, and that could accept, of course, continuous parameters, which would be nice. But it does have some other downsides. And then on the high end of expressiveness, arguably you have language interfaces, or language models. But language models have a whole host of other challenges, exciting in many ways, unexciting in many other ways. They're very hard to understand. They can be quite a mess to try to generate in a way that makes sense to forecasters, even though that they are powerful. So obviously, I think that arbitrary functions are one that really has not been getting much attention, but is a pretty exciting medium of these different options. So I would encourage people to explore this. So going back a little bit, how would this kind of work? So going back to the Apple Vision Pro example, in order to put this into a function definition, we could kind of look at this as how many of these items will be available in this month in this country, and then just accept that these are 2 parameters that a function should have. So that would be a function this is what the type definition looks like. You just accept a country in a month. And then it's really not that hard to generate a simple function that actually outputs this. So this is one example of me just asking ChatGPT to, I just copied and pasted the results from Manifold and asked ChatGPT to come up with a function that will give me those results. And obviously in this case, it just does it by a hash, but that's still a good start. Arguably, we could ask forecasters to basically do a big job at this. Of course, as you may very well quickly imagine, forecasters would probably want to start using extrapolations. Instead of actually just plugging in each one, they'd be wanting to use some function. Multiple ways that could work, but yeah. I tried doing it in here, but then it became quite harder to read, so I decided you guys could probably imagine that aspect for yourself. At the same time, one great thing about using functions and function definitions is that you could kind of get arbitrarily complicated. So while you're at it, you could also add just like for any single product, and you just have like a list of all the products that may or may not be coming out in the future. In the same case, for stock market stuff, for every single stock market company, what will each indicator of each company be at each date in the future or each date in time? While you're at it, like a lot of people want to know, like between these two dates, how much will things change? That's like a very answerable question that you could provide. And if you want to get more intense, maybe people who believe in AI timelines think that some stocks will go crazy in the next 10 years. So in that case, you could have individualized forecasts that basically take in information about a specific individual and try to give an estimate which would be more like, upon 10 hours of deliberation or upon 50 hours of deliberation, what do we think the specific individual with these characteristics would think? Which is now like individualized forecasting, which is something that isn't too hard if you have some pretty basic models of how these people work that can be useful enough to be somewhat predictive. So how would functions work? Can we actually like take these arbitrary functions and put them into prediction markets? There are a few things that we need. I think all of these are like doable, although hard. So first, people obviously need to be able to submit functions. This requires us to have some architecture in mind, but is a solvable problem. Second, we need to be able to aggregate these functions. That's also pretty possible. It's a bit more challenging than, of course, with existing methods because you have to do the aggregation on demand. Basically what happens is that if you get 50 people forecasting using functions, when someone wants an aggregate for that, for a specific combination of parameters, we have to call all of their functions at the same time and then aggregate them on demand for that specific user. But that's definitely something we could do. We just need more advanced systems. Scoring also, it's definitely more challenging to score these. It'd be challenging to score them for every single possible input, especially for continuous inputs, which would take a long time. However, you could do it randomly, right? So as long as the forecasters don't know which exact inputs are going to be selected, you could basically randomly sample, randomly take inputs in that space, and then score those inputs, and that could be a pretty decent representation. And then how do we get users to do this? That's definitely a challenge. Arguably, it's hard enough to get people to do super forecasting. How do we get super forecasters to also write programming? I would call those super duper forecasters. And obviously, like this would be some work. At the same time, I feel like a lot of people undervalue the potential of people like you guys, right? Like people would say like, oh, there's no way forecasters are smart enough to both be forecasters and also write code. This is not possible. I'm more skeptical. I'd also say that we don't need absolutely every forecaster to do this. It could be that some people write code and some people some people forecast using very specific point estimates or distributions, and those get imported into code and expanded upon. So there could be very nice collaborations between like a few forecasters and a few function writers in order to generate these like estimation functions. What would this a bit look like in practice? So the way that I see it is we have these estimation functions as these very neat middle layers. These would be generated either using heavy-duty computations, or it'd be generated just by someone kind of YOLOing it and like trying to estimate each parameter themselves, which is how a lot of forecasting was done, so it's totally, could be fine. If we could have standardized formats, which the standard is just, is understood what programs to run, or like what programming languages to do this, then if someone gets this nice module, they could get a lot of stuff out of it. So then you could put together dashboards, calculators, automated decision-making, scoring, aggregates, all of that stuff is hypothetically like an abstracted layer from the actual function itself. Right now, in the previous calculators I showed you, typically the workflow, or for the COVID models, the workflow often is that someone will spend a lot of time generating forecasts for COVID in a specific area. Then they'll like take that data, cache it in some JavaScript, make a custom JavaScript widget for it for people to interact with, and then give that to people. However, that's impossible to roll back. Like at this point, like users of this, there's typically no API to it. This is like non-standard, completely non-standard. So this really locks us in. However, if we are able to make this standard, then hypothetically in the future, they would just give this like middle layer, which is like a standardized function. And then from that, they could get a lot of these benefits in a nicer way. But, okay, so, sorry. Like I said, this is a big topic. On one hand, there's like what could we enable when we do it? On the other hand, it's like what technical challenges do we actually have in front of us for those who are interested in doing the software engineering necessary to make good workflows so that this could work smoothly? On that side, I think that there are basically a few things that we need to make these estimation functions possible and run well. They obviously have to be some programming language that we use. Second, they have to run very quickly. This means that we're not talking about huge models that take forever to compute. Typically, you'd want to cache all that information into a smaller program, but still a program. Third, we obviously need to use standard formats that could work in many places. Fourth, it needs to be embeddable. So if you're going to submit your forecast to a competition, you need to be able to submit a small forecast or a small function that has to hopefully not need gigantic libraries. They're going to be a pain to like work with other libraries. Fifth, hopefully the output would be probability densities, and that should work smoothly. And sixth, this is not the language itself, but in order for this to kind of make any sense at like a big scale, we need like hopefully some great idea of what are some really neat function definitions that work well together and are modular. So in the future, when people are functioning in these like big functions, we have some clear idea that there are like 5 different great type definitions that are like a good fit for people to forecast on. And then once they have those, then it's pretty easy to do stuff. For example, maybe there's a forecast on how valuable a person is with specific parameters in terms of the lives that you're trying to save. So like how much would you donate to save a life at 5 years old versus 25 years old? And that will be a very different calculation than a question of how many people of X conditions will be saved for a specific intervention that you may be donating to. Like these are 2 isolated things that are both modular, but we have both of them as like separate prediction questions. Yes. So you may be thinking, this looks like a whole lot of work. No existing language seems to be an amazing fit for all of this stuff. Like, what are we going to do? I guess we're doomed. We could give up now. Yeah, that totally suck. Fortunately, some of us have been working. Yeah, thank you, Quinn, for helping out on this. And we have multiple people now have been part of making this a thing. So Squiggle is a language custom made for this type of use case. It runs on JavaScript, so it just is interpreted in JavaScript. That means it could be run very well in the browser. It's unlike JavaScript because it's like a custom language. It's much easier sandboxed, so you don't have to be that afraid about allowing people to run, like, to upload snippets and then running on your machine. I'll now give you a very quick tour of how this works. 1 second. Now I don't have 3 hands, so I need this like mic set up. Cool. What time is it? Yeah. So this is like a very quick thing. So you could see that as you type, this distribution is going to be 5K to 100 million. And as you click keystrokes, everything updates. If you want to change the number of samples to make things smoother, you can, but most of the time you don't want to because you want to be like doing things iteratively. And I'm going to try to, no. Yeah, you have to be, I think my computer is, yeah, great. Yeah, everything works typically with samples. So with most distributions, you'll see this little like plot on the bottom. This represents the specific samples that's behind this distribution. That's important because as you start doing calculations on this, you may care about the correlations. And for that, we need samples to be kept in the right order. This is like a mixed distribution. And that's kind of cool because if you want to write functions, that's very possible. So here we're just writing a function that takes in t from any point like 1 to 100 and outputs that mixed distribution. And if you hover over it, you can see that little mixed distribution changing, where the mixed distribution is a combination of a normal and a uniform. And that guy will adjust over time to be very big. And then, of course, if you want anything else like dictionaries and arrays, it supports that to like a pretty basic level. Of course, this is kind of a simple programming language, as you'd expect for like 2-person years or something like that of effort. But it's not made to do everything. Like, hopefully you build big models with other languages and then like take the outputs of that and put them into here. Or you just use this as something that at least is pretty understandable because it is like a small language. If you want to, like, we have documentation now. So if you're interested in using it for your own, there are like a lot of different plot types that you could choose, tables. You can get decently fancy. Here's a cost of reading calculator is like a very simple example. Where basically have a table for every single book that you have How much would it cost you to read, assuming that your time is worth X amount of time, like per hour, and it takes you, like this is your reading speed. So in this case, 400 to 900, whatever, you enter your time. But one nice thing about this is like, A, you have the calculator. It's very easy to have this and show it to other people. But B, the code is very simple, and that's something that people could copy and then run themselves, or in a better world, in the future versions of Squiggle Hub, hopefully, or whatever tools other people come up with, it should be possible to like import someone's functions and then just use them on demand. So if someone else has a great calculator for something like this, you could use it to decide what books to read, or to tell your friends how, to be that annoying friend who tells all of their friends like how much time they're wasting by reading fiction books instead of doing useful stuff. So, many useful things out there. But that's not all. So once you start getting into functions, I think a lot of things become valuable or possible that people haven't been thinking about. And that's one thing that I'm particularly excited about. But I think that there just really hasn't been much thinking around this. I think one thing I've noticed is that a lot of people try to estimate things in terms of tables or things that could be easily stated without functions. But when you start opening up the possibility for functions, then things become more possible. So for example, one of the interesting areas I'm excited about is something we call like relative value functions. So the way that a lot of people estimate the value of things is that they try to put everything in terms of one common unit and then make a gigantic table about how probably the number of everything in that unit, and if they're being very advanced, the probability distribution of everything in that unit. But that gets incredibly messy for different kinds of things. So for example, it's nice to estimate the value of personal health interventions in terms of qualities, like quality life year adjusted, or maybe disability life year adjusted. But if we also care about existential risks, and some people are trying to estimate the value of a project that will has like a 1 out of a billion chance of saving the whole world, it's very hard to estimate that in terms of dollies or qualities, because then your estimate would be a huge mess. At the same time, if you use you can't use one unit for the two of them. What some people may suggest is we come up with 50 awesome units, and everything has to find one of these 50 units, which is a good fit for. But that is a huge pain. That is not that great of a fit. I think one possible thing here is this could take a while to say, so I'll leave a quick thing. There's more writing about it online. But basically here you write a function that takes in any two items that you care about, and it returns two probability distributions, one for each item. And that makes it easy to give a ratio of the two. And this basically captures all of the uncertainty that's inherent between these two objects, but you're still able to get the flexibility of being able to do it for many objects. So what does that look like? So please don't take these values literally. But over here, we basically have a function that says I may be interested in how many microdooms is equal to 1 microtopia, where microdoom is something like, you can take this. A microdoom is something like 1/millionth of the chance of the Earth being destroyed. A microtopia is 1/millionth the chance of the Earth being great forever. If you think that the Earth is likely to go through at least 5 different existential threats before being good forever, then you may think that the ratio is kind of off. At the same time, people may be interested in the difference between how much do we value $1 from different times of different funding agencies in effective altruism or outside of effective altruism. And these may have a lot of commonality between each other. And then at the same time, people may have ideas about how much we value one cow life versus a cow year versus a human life versus a human year. And when we're valuing these things, it should be obvious that a lot of these have very different correlations with each other. So right now, I'm showing all of these guys in terms of 1 microtopia, and I'm showing all of these in terms of 1 open fill dollar, and all of these in terms of 1 cow quality. But if I wanted to show all of these within, compared to 1 microtopia, then you'll see that they're very, very uncertain in this case, and it's a very small value. All of this basically comes from this little snippet of code. So I wrote this code to try to estimate this is how good this thing is in terms of this thing, and as long as the correlations are kept, when you divide one by something else with that goes through the same items, those get canceled out. So it's not too hard to write this. The function definition is this little function on the bottom. So it's just it takes in 2 strings representing 2 items, and it outputs 2 probability densities. So that part is not super complicated. Of course, getting the rest of it together is kind of messy. And then going back to the export, once you have that, you could start making the pretty graphs, right? Where this is kind of like, it shows distance in proportion to how different these two items are, right? So in this case, the sentient welfare is like pretty different from these other guys in terms of like when you divide one by the other, you'll get many orders of magnitude of uncertainty. But if you're comparing two over here, like two similar funds will be very similar to each other. Right? So obviously, this is like the big table of everything times itself. It's red if it's very uncertain. So basically, you could tell that if we used any single row, it'll be bad for at least some of the variables that we may care about. So we really just need to keep like basically the big joint density of all the distributions. That's difficult to present itself. So like this other format where we just give two at a time is like a pretty decent middle ground, I think. How would this be resolved? Like that's obviously a big challenge. One way is that we basically randomly sample a few of these and then give them to either experts or we give them to readers to spend like 50 hours on. So we basically think through some amplification procedures in order to get as good an idea as possible as some of these numbers. And the goal of estimators is to estimate, like, to do a pretty decent job at like being efficient at much more quickly coming up with what we would have done with a lot more time. Yes, so hypothetically, if we could do relative values or something like that, it would be amazing to have estimates of the value of all the things that effective altruists care about and then all the things that people care about. Obviously, for something like Manifold, it would be nice to have functions for like how valuable is every question, how valuable is every forecast on every question, how valuable is every change to Manifold. This type of procedure is one that like hypothetically could work, but it is going to be a lot of work to implement. I would be excited about people doing it. At the same time, personal life things too. Like I'm trying to figure out like, I've started but haven't gotten that far, and like how valuable are the food that I eat and the personal things I do and my family and my friends and all those things in my life. And like hypothetically, if we could encode all of this into a function, and this is one way of doing it, then in the future we should be able to have ML agents get us from, they'll start in level 1 automation before level 5 of like kind of helping us tell us what to do personally or organizationally. Like this could be part of the infrastructure. Of course, you want to make sure you do that well. There are ways it could go not super well, but one good thing is that you could ask, you could have other forecasts on, will this other forecast go well? And if they go well, it's fine. You could just go ahead and do them. So yeah, big picture thoughts, the way that all this works. Basically, we want to make some big world models, essentially, of, and the way that we'll do that is with these estimation functions and data that will have to be fed to it. You could always feed the results of that to LLMs to do the last mile problem on. So it's possible that someone won't have a question that's exactly in one of these setups, but it's like close enough that we could then like have an LLM basically read all the estimation functions and then update on that and then figure out the last mile to give to any other questions that someone may want. Or you could use these for human automation or like for decision automation and all of that. In order to generate these, like LLMs are also great. So it's possible to use Claude to write a lot of Squiggle code. It's still not like, there's still like some details, but a lot of the work could be done by Claude right now. I'm sure that over time it'll become easier for people to do that. So hopefully in the future, a more advanced use case would be a forecaster kind of overseeing the development of like these huge functions being built by language models and making sure that they're like on point. And then, of course, it gets encoded as a world model, and then later use language models on the other end too. But yeah, a lot of like things we could kind of achieve. So it would be great to have big utility functions basically for many things. It's a lot of work to do a great job at that, but it's definitely something we could get started on. It may be possible to have metrics like this at some point for some combination of this, where basically we say, for 90% of things that humans are thinking about, we want to provide an answer very quickly that's about as good as what forecasters would come up with if they spent many hours thinking about it. And over time, some of these benchmarks we could improve. So this is like kind of one way to get there. Another way of thinking about it is like maybe we could use these games as a way to play video games instead of having just LLMs do it. So the idea is like right now, it's definitely possible to get LLMs to play video games, but when they do, they're not very interpretable, they're not very human understandable. So hopefully LLMs, instead of playing the video game, will write us functions that'll play the video game for us, right? So they basically would write cost-benefit analyses that could be used to do a decent job at these. Not as good a job as like you could with a complete black box method, but it would have the benefits of being much more understandable. And then, of course, I've had some forecasts on this. So on Manifold, there are forecasts for like when is some forecasting platform going to actually accept using these functions. If you guys think that they're great or terrible, I encourage you to forecast on that. I would also, of course, encourage any forecasting competition or any forecasting platform to bet a whole lot and then do it to reward themselves for that. Yes. So yeah, exploration needed. So there's definitely just like a ton of work to do. We have one experimental language, but it's still like relatively small. We really would like to see forecasting platforms start actually trying, allowing these types of setups on their forecasting platforms as like alternatives to the current question items that you have. For individuals, like, yeah, I'm really excited to see people try to make estimation functions that help them with their life or help them like make decisions with their friends or organizations. Yeah, there just really has not been that much exploration here. So, but like hypothetically, it could be a very neat thing. And that's the talk. Yeah. Yes.
We have a microphone for a question, so we just pass that around.
Oh, I should also say, yeah, Squiggle Hub is all free. Squiggle language is open source. We're trying to make it very accessible. We have a Discord if you're interested in sharing ideas about this or would like help. If you're doing anything about X risks, we could have spent extra time helping you. Yeah, in general, happy to see experimentation here and help with that as we can. Yeah.
Thanks. Hi, Ozzie. Yeah, I think this is really cool idea. I just have some comments. I guess one thing that it made me think of is like, you're saying like super forecasters, for example, could try to impose a function of form to extrapolate what they would forecast on like similar things. And that made me think it would be interesting to have an iterative process of like, they got some function and then the function gives some forecast on some other questions. But then if they also do the questions, do the forecast, because the way I guess super forecasting forecast is still like a little bit subjective, mysterious, is not entirely specified. So it would be interesting to see like if they also independently forecast how far that is from the function to tell you like how to adjust the function. But it does make me think like we trust statistical models maybe a bit too much because there's a very clear function of form and you just kind of trust it. But like now I'm skeptical of how well it is able to extrapolate the intuition and the process of super forecasting. So maybe all the function of form stuff should not be like trusted as much as I know at least I normally do, just because like it's some math there. Just number one, just like it would be interesting to compare between extrapolation by a function and like whatever the super forecasters do. And number two, I find it interesting that you're trying to like quantify everything, but I also find it kind of scary. You know, this is maybe related to comment number one, right? Like if we create these functions and it can calculate the value and everything, and then we automate the decision, but ultimately we don't know when it extrapolate to some weird place, like how we feel about those decisions. If they're just automated, that's kind of scary. That's kind of like unaligned AGI or like AGI who doesn't really understand human value. There's like some function, some math, and who knows what's happening. So I think it's a really interesting thing to explore, but I would just caution against saying like, hey, we should like automate it just like that.
Yeah, there's a lot to say there. One question is like how much can we trust these systems and how much can we trust similar approaches? I like going meta, so at least one meta answer, although this is probably not exactly what you're looking for, is that we'll have some trusted people that all they do is forecast how overconfident all these other people are and how overconfident all the functions are. So this is kind of a general reasoning system, and if we think that it's pretty efficient at being a reasoning system, then it may be possible to use parts of it with the most highly trusted areas in order to do a good job policing parts that we don't trust as well. When it comes to possible dangers like that, yeah, it's kind of dangerous for humans to use reason, period. Like when humans try reasoning about things, they often mess up, and it leads to like really bad outcomes. I think that Like I think that like the best that we could do is basically try to reason a lot faster. So we try to figure out like the best strategies about how we reason. Like typically having scoring is pretty good. Having people making sure that we have the right incentives is pretty good. Making sure that we have the high trusted people. Trying to really actively like be on hunting for areas where they could be biased, and hopefully having like prediction systems for them to be incentivized to like really hunt down bad stuff and look for it. I think that's all good. So I think we should put all of that together, and we should expect to do like a better job. But of course, reasoning is scary. So yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure about the very fast parts, but I agree with the idea of like combining our reasoning with models and going back and forth to understand how to improve that process. That I agree with.
I'd agree with, yeah.
Hey, so I think one of the most exciting parts of Squiggle as a demo is the fact that you can type out the language and then you see these probability distributions on the right-hand side. Have you thought about, given one of the challenges here that you've described is turning the expressivity of functions into something that people can use to express their thoughts, about how to do it the other way, right? Where where forecasters can use a user interface to sort of paint what they're thinking and then have that turn into a function. Do you think that's a tractable thing? Or do you think that you're going to just need super duper forecasters to be able to really get this working?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff to be done here. So one of them is like, there are definitely a lot of widgets to be made. We still need widgets to just draw a simple probability distribution and have that be standard. But after we do that, it would probably be possible to have widgets to kind of draw a function over time, at least a single variable or maybe two variables, and have that be like an interactive thing for some types of people. At the same time, it's possible to have language models where you basically describe what you think is going to happen in plain text, and then it kind of generates the representation for you, and then it hopefully would just generate the graphs for you. And then if it's something like ChatGPT, you should be able to then say like, hey, I think this is a bit low in this area, can you just increase it in that space? And then it could make a corresponding update. So I think that basically there's a lot of room for a lot of different tooling to exist in this space. Yeah.
Just a little addition to that suggestion. For nonverbal people, it would be nice to just...
Yeah.
So for nonverbal people or less verbal people, it would be super nice to do something that I think he suggested, where you just pull around on the distribution, you know? You don't use words, it's just, yeah.
Yeah. I agree. Like there's some combination here. That, yeah.
So I've been to exactly 2 talks here at this conference where there was code on the board. So being a simple pattern matcher that I am, it leads me to think of the functions as kind of a domain-specific bots.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a reasonable thing to think? And do you think like, what's then like a difference between what you're doing versus just saying, okay, we have a language for writing bots in some sense? I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
I mean, it depends on your definition of bot. I mean, it's a bot in the same way that like writing a function that plugs into Excel, like would you call that a bot because it's triggered? Like these don't have that much functionality for like agent-like behaviors insofar as like some people talk about with bots.
Well, what I mean is that I can operationalize it by having this function. So if I operationalize it by having this function in my code and then query for, say, the markets that fit into the domain, and then bet according to whatever model underlies the function, right? Like, then I can make it into an actual like trading bot. Does it make sense?
Oh,
yeah. So I mean, of course,
yeah.
the question is that here you are specifically targeting a particular subdomain,
Yeah.
and then if I just randomly poll questions from Manifold, like very few of them will fall into the subdomain. But in essence, like it's something that like for any question in the subdomain will produce a betting strategy, right? Like.
So the semantics, arguably, like it's a very similar thing, but I think semantically, there's a difference between a bot that realizes when it should buy and sell shares versus a function that just outputs its beliefs. Right? In this case, like the belief is just like I believe the correct value of this is X, but it's not saying that I should buy now. So I'm kind of saying that these specifically are just the former. That they're just saying like this is what my belief is, and then they could be aggregated and like they're overlaid in that specific way. So it's basically just like a specific type of bot,
Okay.
arguably.
Yeah, that makes sense, I think.
How do you feel about as a deliberation assistant, where you have two different two different functions provided to different people, and then you can like read the code to like identify the cruxes between them and everything like that? Have you guys been like continuing in sort of that direction?
So yeah, I think this could be neat. I think one way to look at it is like there are ways of improving the black box experience, and then there are ways of improving the white box or the glass box experience. With the black box experience is making sure that there's a great interface for it, and making sure that people have good trust in like, is this going to be calibrated? Is this in an ecosystem where we know that this is someone who's pretty reasonable, who has a track record and stuff like that? On the glass box, it's more like, can we just like read the internals of this system? Like how understandable is this specific thing? It's a lot of work to do a great job at both. So we're kind of starting more with the black box side and doing the glass box insofar as it makes people more quickly be able to generate these. But I can imagine a lot of these functions being incomprehensible to read, but still pretty valuable, right? But yeah, there's a whole lot to do on the, my impression is that it's gonna be hard to really optimize for both. Like you'll probably want different environments where both of them are like good in different cases. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in this whole space. Also very happy to chat as long as you like after this, right? So.
Maybe plug the open problems in JavaScript numerical programming in case there are programmers here.
Oh yeah.
Not that there are any programmers in this room, obviously, but you know.
Yeah, but basically if you go to Effective Developers Forum and look at us up, we have lists of like some open problems. Like there's a lot of JavaScript programming because JavaScript does not have the best scientific tooling yet. So just having good support for probability distributions and things like that for this type of workflow, like there's definitely work to be done over there. At the same time, there's also just like a lot of work by estimators and forecasters and people doing like value judgment and things like that with these types of workflows. So there's a lot of exploration to be done by a lot of people. So if you have any interest in this type of thing, there's likely to be some part that you could like have fun with. Maybe get a lot of fame for, because again, I think that this is really unexplored. So there may be some cool potentials for people to make their mark. Cool. Yeah, happy to end there. Yeah.